You're on mute there at the minute.
I am on mute. Nathan, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
No problem. It's a pleasure. I've never actually spoken to a referee, so it'll be a great insight, I'm sure. We spoke about it yesterday about what we'll talk about, the physical, verbal threats that referees receive, how referees cope under pressure, VAR, of course. That's a big topic at the moment, isn't it? Neurodiversity, just a quick one on that. What specifically, because obviously I know what that kind of is under an umbrella of, but what specifically, or should we wait for that and then you can tell us then?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to just talk about anything. You know, I suppose it's probably a good thing for you to have to ask the question, because if you're coming from a place of where, you know, sort of the man on the street would be, you know, if you want in terms of not maybe wanting to know more about kind of how what that looks like, what it means, all of those things, more than happy to have those discussions. That should be all right. There you go. That's fine. We can do that now.
Today, Nathan Sherratt joins me. He is a footballing English referee. Nathan, I welcome you to the show.
Thanks, Jamie. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
Today we're going to be talking about, obviously, what the insight is like of a referee. But, of course, there's different sides to the game that maybe someone, as you just told me, the normal man on the street might not get an insight of. So go ahead and tell us then, on a personal side of the game, how did you get into refereeing?
It's a bit of a funny one. I suppose I fell into it. I think, you know, the common phrase is, and it's true, nobody grows up wanting to be a referee. And I was no different. I think for me it was a friend of mine. His dad was a referee in National League, not the highest level of non-league in England. And he just said, you know, I'm doing the course. My friend said he's doing the course. He said, my dad will mentor us when we get started. I was 15, 16 years of age, and it was preferable to getting a job in a shop, you know, at that as you do at that age, a pocket money job. It was better to be out refereeing, better for health, better for, you know, many different aspects. And, you know, I just sort of fell into it that way, started doing kids football, and that was where my journey began.
If you wanted to become a football coach, for example, you can only really start becoming a proper football coach taken seriously at the age of 18. For a referee, there is quite a decent pathway from, I think, about the age of 14 or 15. I'm sure you can tell us about that, where you can go on a course and you can start refereeing in your local leagues. Is that a good way to be able to prepare you for what refereeing would be like later on if you were to go on and be a Premier League referee? Or is there a big difference between the two?
I think there's a big difference between the two, but I think there's no doubt that it's a big challenge having to deal with a group of parents who all think that their son or daughter is the next, you know, world-class player that's going to dominate world football. That in itself brings challenges. I think being at the lower levels and hearing every insult from the crowd and things like that. Again, you know, you maybe don't get that in the Premier League at the 40, 50, 60,000 seater stadiums, but you can hear everything. And I think that, you know, it's a really good grounding, getting to grips with the fact that you can only really please half the people at any particular one point in time. I think trying to understand as well that it's very, very difficult to get absolutely every decision correct, which is really bad, you know, if you're a perfectionist. But trying to understand how to manage games of football and getting that, you know, idea of being responsible for the flow of the game is something that, you know, I think you always learn all those fundamentals at the very lowest level.
You mentioned there about controversial decisions, and I suppose without really the Premier League and the top elite divisions of certain countries, it's a lot harder to be able to make mistakes. It's easier to make mistakes. What is that like when you make one of those mistakes? I mean, to then feel like you've been the problem and you've made the wrong decision that can ultimately cost the team 3 points, and at the end of the season, they could get relegated by those 3 points.
It's an absolutely horrible place to be. But the one thing I have to say is that there are no referees ever that I've ever come across, and I've come across a lot in many different countries in many different parts of the world, that ever want to go out and make a mistake. You know, a centre forward doesn't want to go and miss a penalty. A referee doesn't want to miss a penalty in terms of making the decision. It's exactly the same. You know, everybody who's involved in the game wants to be successful, and I think that basically it hurts you so much. You know, you see players, you know, driving home and managers driving home and then can't live with themselves for a result not going the way and things like that. And it's exactly the same as a referee, because you want to make every decision right, and you're a human being. It's not possible, but you want to try and do as much as you possibly can to get as many decisions right as you possibly can, because that is your craft.
You spoke about what it's like to become a referee at the age of 15, 16. We'll go into depth about that later on. The pathway to becoming a referee, could you talk us through that? Because even at the top level, you still have to be, is it kind of where you've got to be invited to manage in the Premier League from the Championship? I mean, could you talk us through kind of the majority of what it would be like from starting off like me, for example, if I wanted to go and become a local referee near me? How long and what are the process to get to the Premier League?
I think at one stage you were looking at around 10 to 15 years. I think it's a slightly lower level now from sort of first qualifying to get in there, because there's a lot of things like the elite development pathway, which we're now seeing, trying to get referees moved up the levels as quickly as possible, because trying to close that gap between the age of the players and the age of the officials in the Premier League is a key target going forward, because clearly from a physiological point of view, you're looking at trying to make sure that physically the referees are in a really good place to keep up with the demands of play, which is of course becoming more and more challenging. The speed of the games is increasing, the intensity is increasing, you know, and you need to try and be there as best as possible. So that's what that is. I think, you know, you've hit the nail on the head to an extent in terms of getting in touch with your county football association if you live in England, trying to get onto a course you know, near you, and then you're looking at trying to do 5 or 6 games and then being a fully qualified official, and then, you know, depending on what age you are, you look at trying to get some games under your belt and see what it looks like in terms of promotions and things, and whether you want to try and climb that ladder. So that's sort of the starting point, and getting used to grassroots game. I think everybody knows Sunday league football on a Sunday morning, and that can be the real grounding and the real learning for a lot of new match officials, and then being exposed to maybe a slightly higher level of football from the line, supporting higher level officials and learning from them, watching what they do, and that can be a big part of the development as well.
We see on video games, for example, myself and Football Manager, I'm a big advocate for that game. I love the game. And there's a lot of, all the referees actually get match official ratings. So some of them might be 8.5, some of them could be 7 or 6s. Is that what happens in real life? And what things go into the ingredients to be able to produce that match rating?
So I think when you're getting observed by an FA observer, they'll be appointed to the game. At the lower levels, it's not every game, but in the professional game, it is every game. And you're looking at a score of 0 to kind of 100, and you know, there's a lot of different averages and things in different leagues in terms of marks and things like that. But what you would be looking to do would be looking to get a good score that would move you up, because in the same way teams have a league table, referees have a league table, and the ones at the top at the end of the season get promoted, and the ones at the bottom can be demoted, and it works in very much the same way. So that's sort of the incentive to try and keep going and keep trying to develop, and to try and protect your place and avoid, you know, demotion as we would call it, but relegation is a word that's probably a little bit more synonymous with those who are not in refereeing but really associated with football.
As a referee yourself, or when you talk to other referees that are around you, if they, at the halftime or at the full time when there's, you go back into the changing rooms with your officials, obviously you go over the game and you could say that was a good decision, that was a good decision. Do you get a buzz off that if you've made the correct decision that could be really tight in really big high stake games, or you just made the correct decision that is bang on correct in your mind? Do you get a buzz out of that? What as a referee keeps you entertained?
Yeah, I think you get a buzz out of it when you do something like playing a really good advantage, because you know that you've allowed the game to flow and it's led to a goal, and you can come back and penalise after a goal's been scored, and that's a really good moment. And I think that a big satisfaction really for a referee is getting those expected decisions right as well. Because that shows that you are reading the game really well, you're seeing things really clearly, and you're making the decisions, and you've got a good, you're able to feel the game breathe, and you've allowed the game to breathe, but you know when's the right point to blow the whistle and to actually intervene and say, right, that's a foul. We need to, keep a lid on it, because obviously we've all seen games get out of hand at stage.
As a player who's played in grassroots level in the local area, of course, I love a referee who communicates with the opposition and with the team. But I also like the referees who, that was a great pass, like the encouragement. I like the encouragement. Whereas you've got the referees who could be classed as a bit cold, a bit not talking as much, just gives the cards, just tells you that's a foul. What sort of referee, in your eyes yourself, or as a player, if you look into a player's perspective, what sort of referees make the best referees?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of being a good communicator. I think you've got to strike a balance. I think you don't want to be overly personal with players, but equally you don't want to be distant. And I think sometimes the best place to kind of set that out is at the coin toss before the game starts, to have a little word with the captains, to set out some expectations, but also to tell them how you're going to try and referee that game, and that gives them a chance to buy into what you're all about, and they know the way you're going to go about your business. So I think that's always a good way to do it. But I do, like I say, I do think it's a balancing act between not being overly personal, but also making sure that you're not distant and aloof. And they're the types of referees that obviously come under great levels of criticism, and rightly so.
We could base it off grassroots level, very unlikely. So let's go a bit higher, League One, Championship, National League, those sorts of professional status leagues. I don't think a lot of people, if they haven't done a lot of research, understand how much referees prepare mentally and physically for games. I mean, for example, I could tell you where the nutritional side of a referee is just as important as it would be for a player, right?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important. You've got to do a lot of things right in the same way players do. You're looking at trying to get the right diet. You're looking to try and be in a really good place tactically. So very much in the same way that teams will observe their opponents, the refereeing team will look at patterns at set pieces, the way teams like to take set pieces, so the referee's got an idea of where the ball might go, what they might try, positions and movement, things to watch out for. If you know that a certain team is particularly keen on having blockers at set pieces, you'll be looking for fouls in those zones, because you've done your homework. So it's about preparation in that regard. Preparation, as you say, physically, there's a lot of training camps that go on every other week during the season. The officials will come together as groups. So you've got the group, championship group, and select group, or select group 1, which is Premier League. And they'll all come together as in their 3 individual groups, and some groups as well for National League officials also, and discuss incidents, look at what we need to improve on in recent games that we've got to get on top of, and have an honest conversation and have an open discussion as well about decisions, so we know what the expectation is and what we're trying to achieve when we go out on a Saturday or a midweek evening.
Twitter or social media, I'd like to say Twitter, because you can voice your opinion a lot more on there. And this is going off a lot of people's perspectives on referees, where it's very negative. People might not understand, hence why it's so great to have you on today. So again, thank you for coming on. And it's so good to have a good insight as to what a referee's world is like, because it's not going onto the pitch and trying to make a wrong decision, like you said. It's about getting the game as fair as possible. But for a referee, one decision in a game, it could be a corner, a throw-in, could basically change a fan's perspective on the whole game's outcome. As a referee, you see this a lot where, someone like Mike Dean, obviously retired a few years ago, could have made a decision wrong in this game or another game. And that's really taken seriously with fans. Of course it would be. But because you're a referee, what sort of insight, when you look at these tweets and things on social media, do you think, because obviously you've been in their shoes in somewhat before?
I laugh, me, because I think that some players at certain clubs would never turn out for their team ever again. If you look at somebody like Nicholas Jackson at Chelsea, for example, if when a referee doesn't give a penalty for Chelsea, he takes all that stick on Twitter, if when Nicholas Jackson sticks one over the bar inside the 6-yard box, if he took that much stick that the referees take, I think he'd say to whoever the Chelsea manager is going to be, I don't want to play next week, because I can't play for a fan base like this. I can't play for all that. And he doesn't want to miss that shot on goal any more than the referee wants to not give that penalty because they've missed an important detail. So the way I look at it is I laugh, because I think that officials get so much more stick than any other group of people who are involved in the game, including managers. I will say that unequivocally. Managers do not get as much stick as referees, and I don't care what anybody says. I know there's a lot of clubs that don't like their managers out there, but still referees take more stick. And I think that, it's very, very difficult. But what I will say is it has next to no impact at all. But if it makes people feel better, then I suppose it's got something.
Maybe that could be, though, because of things like social media, where Nicholas Jackson, as you said, has a more of a personal connection with fans. And I'm not saying there's idolizations for referees without trying to sound rude. There's no social media for them. There's nothing personal with them. Would you say I'm correct, or would you say the reason why people are so disrespectful to referees would be because sometimes, and they're all put under one bracket, is if one referee makes a bad decision, they're all just as bad as each other?
I see so much good social media usage by referees, and it's not perhaps what you would expect. So perhaps you might think that they would be showing off a new watch or a new car like players. It's not quite the same. A lot of it's about an insight of what's actually going on for those referees, where they're going, what they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve in those games. And it's probably maybe only other referees that are interested. But I think there's still a great insight. And I think that if we can tip the balance slightly into the average football supporter as well, that can be really useful, because I think giving an insight and a window into the world of what it's all about to be a referee and to referee games and to be involved in that can only help the standing of officials in games. And I think that probably this season, the mic'd up programme that we've seen on Sky and TNT has been a really, really good thing for showing what's gone on in decision-making processes. And it's actually highlighted some mistakes as well, which is, shows the human side of it. Doesn't get accepted, doesn't make it any easier to sort of stomach that. But I think it is really, really important that we can see, the facts of what's going on, that they are trying to get the right processes, and sometimes not getting the right processes, but also understanding the learning from that, which is then obviously explained when it goes back to the studio with Howard Webb.
Semi-automated offsides, I believe, are coming into play in the Champions League, and you could tell us if it is the Premier League and where else in the world it's going to become a thing. And I think they've used it before in the past, possibly in the World Cup, but again, you can tell us. Why semi-automated? Why not completely automated?
It can never be completely automated because the technology is unable to ascertain where the ball was played. So We need human beings to tell them where the ball was played, and then that machine can look at the process of where everybody was on the field of play in that moment. There might be advancements in AI that then allow the technology to know what it's looking for in terms of where the ball was played. But that's something that, is some way off. You're right in saying that it's in the Champions League. You're right in saying that it's been in a lot of competitions. It's going to be in the Euros this summer. It's been in the World Cup. And it'll be in the Premier League next season if the clubs vote to keep VAR. So I think that it's a really useful tool. I think it may be unpopular initially, even though it's what fans think that they want. So the fans are saying, let's get this semi-automated stuff. It works really well in World Cup, works really well in Champions League, whatever. I think that the Premier League at the moment has a bit of a higher level of tolerance around offsides in terms of the thickness of the lines that get drawn, and that allows a little bit more wriggle room. I think that when it's so absolute, as it will be when semi-automated offsides come in, I think that could be unpopular, because you'll get a lot of people saying, oh, well, it was a toe here or a hair there or whatever it is. But that's what people are saying that they want. So let's see how it goes when it comes into practice. It's something that, we've seen that goal line technology is quite popular because there's a lack of a subjective element to it. Let's see if semi-automated VAR, which doesn't have subjectivity, is also going to be popular too. It'll be an interesting thing to watch, because I think when you look at how it's received in the Premier League is the true test, because tournament football comes and goes, but Premier League, when we're talking in England, it's our bread and butter.
I've got a whole host of questions here to ask that are frequently possibly unanswered, I'd like to say, so to give people a good insight. But on a personal level for you, and again, other referees around, to make this semi-automated offsides means it's less human. I mean, we can go back, 5 or 6 years ago when there was no VAR, and there was there was a few more officials on the pitch at certain times. They were scattered all over. But why? I mean, what is this sort of outcome of this semi-automated business where there's less human involved?
I think I think we're going to be in a pretty clear place once the 24-25 season begins, in terms of, as we've just talked about, the offsides and of course we've got the goal line technology. I think there's never going to be a way where you're going to be able to get around subjective decisions. So you'll always need the human element on that. And this is where I think football hasn't really changed in the last 20 or 30 years, because, and this includes the VAR era that we're now in, because what you still have, in my opinion, is you still have people down the pub after the game talking about decisions, and some will say one way, some will say another. It's just a different type of game of opinions now to what it was. It's not the same, it's not the same as when a referee was on a pitch and made a decision and some people thought it was a penalty and some people didn't. It's just changed a little bit, but it's the same debate that we've always known in the game.
I'd hate to say referees in the Premier League are less quick, less rapid at making their decisions, but the proof is in the pudding, where I believe the Champions League, to make a VAR decision call is done in a really small amount of time. In the Premier League, there's no cap on how long they can take. Why is officiating slower in certain leagues and certain competitions?
There's no cap on how long you're allowed to make a decision in any competition. It's not within the IFAB protocol that's allowed. So it may appear that the decisions are being made quicker, and they may well be made quicker in European competitions. But that's something that's not by design. That's just a sort of an outcome that's occurred. I think when you are looking at decisions, and probably one of the big ones that took quite a long time and had a massive bearing come the end of the season, was the goal when Newcastle beat Arsenal earlier in the season at St James's Park. that was a key decision, and it probably took 2 or 3 minutes to make that decision. But that's a decision that, although the game was played in October, I think, the at the end of the season now, we've got the hindsight, if you want to look at it, and we can see the full season as it played out. That's had a massive impact. So if that decision had taken 30 seconds, then a lot of people would say, well, if you look back in October, they rushed that decision and Arsenal lost the title as a result of it. So I think that my observation is that they actually have slowed down in the decision-making process over the last year, and the result has been better decisions being made. So I think I think football supporters, and I'm a football supporter as well. I'm not just a referee.
Of course.
For me, I as a fan of a Premier League team that that is involved in a competition where VAR is in play, I'd rather they took the 2 or 3 minutes and got the right decision, and my team gets the right outcome. And I looked at a table probably a few days ago where it said what would the points difference be without VAR, and I think more than half the teams it was 0. So no points added, no points taken away. And I think it might have been slightly different to that if you looked at the same table, maybe in the 2 or 3 seasons that preceded this one, because I think they've taken a little bit longer, but I think the accuracy of the decisions and using technologies improved. So that's a debate for a lot of people to have. But in my opinion, I'd rather they take 2 or 3 minutes, get the decision right, and we can, whether it's controversial or not, we can add it on at the end.
I completely understand that, and to be fair, that's a good opener because, again, I don't really think that kind of way that you think, of course, being a referee. And you mentioned that possibly at the start of next season, from day dot, you would expect VAR to have a big improvement with the semi-automations, offside and things like that, and goal line technology. But clubs are having a vote to scrap VAR, and I believe Wolves brought this to the table because they thought that they were treated misfairly compared to other clubs. But again, you've mentioned the table, and the majority of clubs have been treated quite well. Would you keep VAR as a referee?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that maybe a lot of people who are listening and watching would expect me to say that, but I would. I think it's made a big difference. The facts don't lie. You get about 10% higher accuracy of decision making in the Premier League compared to the Championship. Championship doesn't have VAR, Premier League does. And actually, there's been an improvement in the Championship in the accuracy of decision making without VAR. So that also shows that the standard of refereeing is improving as well, which is something that a lot of fans have a lot of questions marks over. But you can judge it where they don't have technology and the accuracy of decision making is increasing. But yes, I would definitely keep it. I think Wolves have had a bit of a raw deal this season because there's been, I can think of 2 in particular. Probably the most notable maybe coming in the first game of the season at Old Trafford, where Onana clattered the centre forward and they didn't get a penalty. I think that set the tone for Wolves' season. I think they've had a raw deal on a few occasions. But I think there's 1 or 2 occasions where Gary O'Neill's been very vocal and he's been completely wrong. And the biggest one for that is been the West Ham equaliser, Max Kilman chalked off. That is so clear in law that decision was correct that he just, in my opinion, he just didn't have a right, really. And somebody should have told him that before he came out and did the press. He didn't have a right to complain about that. But I think he's definitely had a right to complain about 1 or 2 other things. And I think they've had a tough season. And it doesn't surprise me that that's their reaction. I don't think that they'll get the 14 votes that they need from the 20 clubs to get it to go through. And I do think VAR will stay. I think it might be a big problem if it doesn't, in terms of I can't see the referees being very happy about that, because if VAR is not being used in the domestic leagues, that impacts whether referees can represent our country in the Champions League and in the World Cup and in the European Championships, because UEFA are not massively going to be keen on appointing referees who are not using VAR week in, week out in their domestic leagues. So what I would say is, if the clubs do vote to remove VAR, I have a feeling the PGMOL might have something to say about that, and it will be interesting to see what the reaction is from the referees.
When is that vote? The 14 out of 20. So the 14 out of 20 clubs could decide. And you would like to say, being the sport that football is, to go ahead and ask the fans. I mean, have the fans have some sort of say in it? Because ultimately, it is the fans that are really funding the sport. But when is this vote going ahead that will really decide the future of VAR?
I think it's in the next couple of weeks, first or second week of June, when they have the meeting for the new season. So the new clubs, the 3 new clubs, are welcomed, and the other 3 clubs depart. That's when that will take place. I think that it'll be an interesting vote, and I think that hopefully some of the clubs look at how it's, because there's some clubs that benefited. Remember, some clubs that have more points with VAR than they would have had if it wasn't in there. I said the majority are on 0 in terms of it hasn't impacted them negatively or positively, but there are some that have been positive and some that have been negative. So, that you'd like to think that 1 or 2 clubs would look at that and say, actually, do you know what? It could benefit us. We could be. There's one team, I might be wrong here, I think there's one team that got 7 more points with VAR. So, I think any one of the 20 clubs should really look at that and say that could be us. We could get 7 more points next season with VAR, and that's absolutely a game changer. That puts teams from middle of the bottom half to European places in the Premier League. So it's a really, really significant number of points when the end of the season comes around. That one.
You mentioned there Gary O'Neill. I do like him. I think he's a decent manager, but obviously we're here for referees and their decisions.
I like Gary O'Neill as well. I think he's doing a great job.
I think he is. I think he's doing a great job. I think they could get into Europe next season. I think it's only a matter of time for Gary O'Neill to be given that sort of push, if you like, into the big leagues and to the big.
I think, Jamie, that Gary O'Neill came in, a day or 2 before the season started, no pre-season with the team, and to do what they did, I think he's doing an outstanding job.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. Now, what maybe you wouldn't like as a referee, and what I don't like as a football fan, is to see managers or players lose their head. I don't like that at all. I think it's the gentleman's game as it should be. I think that's correct, and how that should be. I think they get media trained, don't they, in their licenses, so they should be able to cope with that. I get he's frustrated, but if you were refereeing that game with West Ham against Wolves, and you made the exact decision that the referee made, and Gary O'Neill's come out and said what he said, what do you feel inside? Do you feel personally attacked?
Which game was it, Jamie?
It was West Ham versus Wolves when Gary O'Neill came out and had his
right. Okay. Yeah, I think it's so hard because you don't have a right of reply. That's the most difficult part of it, is you can't come out and give your side of it. Where I think it would be really useful would be if there was a more in-depth sort of law education process, or even an opportunity to do a referee's course for the press officers, because I feel it's the press officer, and listen, the manager might not want to hear it, but I feel that it's the press officer that it's most incumbent upon that person in every club to actually take the manager aside and say, by the way, that's correct in law, and I'm telling you now, whilst we have had apologies for other decisions being made, we'll not get one for that, because that then impacts on. It's not going to make him feel any better, and he'd probably still have a rant, but he might throw a comment in there where he says, and I know that they'll say it's correct in law and all of that, because then that puts it there. Because I think you do get people who jump on the bandwagon. I think, Gary Lineker on Match of the Day, and I really like Gary, but he got a little bit sucked in by what Gary O'Neill said. And I think that he's got an opinion on what he likes to see in the game as well. The point is, at the end of the day, if you took that particular part of it, and what we're talking about, in case people haven't seen it, is basically the centre forward standing in front of the goalkeeper. If you took that away, teams are so tactically aware and they're so strategic in this day and age that they would, at set pieces, stick somebody in front of the goalkeeper and just leave them there. And then that would mean goalkeepers wouldn't be able to see the flight of the ball. Now, I think on that occasion, it's unlikely that the goalkeeper would have saved it, even if there'd been nobody stood in front of him. So I have sympathy for him in that regard. But at the same time, the law is clear in this area. There's, I think there's a lot of different bits, ambiguity, handball being the biggest one where there's a lot of ambiguity. But on this one, it was pretty crystal clear. And I think a little bit of wasted breath from Gary on that one, unfortunately.
So do you think that referees should have post-match interviews where if there's a key decision in the game that's on social media, they should come out and have some sort of platform to address what happened and why?
Yes, but only if referees can come out and talk about great advantages that they've played, really good penalty decisions that they've made, good decisions to show yellow cards where it's the game settled down. That one yellow card has settled the whole game down and there's been no more cards in the game and it's been really well managed. But I think that we both know that's not what's going to happen. The press will not want to take the referee to put the referee's interview on the TV on Match of the Day if they're talking about a good decision they've made. They'll only want to hear about the controversial ones. So whilst that's the case, my answer's no. That referees shouldn't come out. But if it became, it's obviously it's compulsory, okay, for managers to make an interview after the game. And if it was the same for referees and you had to broadcast that regardless of what happened in the game, then you might say, okay, we'll do that, because then a referee can talk about what they've done well in a game and what's gone well for them and, all of that stuff. But that's not the world that we live in. People are only going to want to hear about the controversial things. And I think if it's only going to be one-way traffic, it's not going to, we hear from managers when they win. Why not hear from referees when they make really good decisions?
What's really frustrating as a football fan is, it's ridiculous to say, we don't have a clue what's offside and what's not offside. And I believe there's a rule change for offside for the upcoming season. But surely, in my opinion, I know it sounds ridiculous, surely one tiny bit of your body, if it's offside, right? But I think next season it's completely changed. So could you talk us through the change?
To be honest, I think offside's one of those where it seems to me the way it's going at the moment is people either are happy with where we're at and the direction that we're going in, or they want the whole body, and then almost like a daylight situation for offside. And I say whatever people want is let it go into law. But what I will say is, I don't think the whole body thing will be particularly popular either, because I could be doing a diving header and you could be stood next to me and I could score, and you've never had a chance to stop me scoring because I'm that far ahead of you. And I think a lot of people wouldn't like that. I think the difficulty is people make suggestions and talk about different things, but you can never know whether you really like something or whether you really think that it's going to help the game until you see it in practice. And that's been the problem that we've seen a lot. I think with offside, I think it's a relatively simple process now compared to where we were at when we had situations where players were pointing and being given offside and all of that. I think we've reeled it back. I think we're back into a place. And I think that the most simple way of understanding it now going forward, as we are, is that if there's a part of the body that is offside that you can't score with, so your hands, then that's, let's not be talking about t-shirt lines like we were, because that's where you go complicated. sophisticated, and I think referees don't appreciate that either. But I think where we're talking about, hands and things being offside, well, can't score with that. But we're talking about heads and feet, then, it makes sense to me. Yes, I'm a referee and I know the laws of the game, but I think it makes sense to most people. And I think if you go for the whole body situation where there's got to be daylight, I think it'll be a lot easier for referees, but I think it might frustrate fans when they see it in practice. In reality, I think it'd be something very, very different.
This is on a grassroots basis now. There's a lot of referees who have been experienced to physical, verbal, and ridiculously death threats. Bit of a tongue twister there. And almost 300 have said that they've experienced abuse from players, coaches, or parents. The one that sticks out to me, the two actually, is coaches and parents. The one that are meant to be leading by example. I mean, coaches go through courses where they shouldn't be having this ability, or they shouldn't be swearing, they shouldn't be having a go at referees. The death threats as well is ridiculous. So please, could you go... Imagine you're in the shoes, or as you are now, or as a 15, 16-year-old referee, really new to the game, who would like to maybe get and be a Premier League referee, and they've experienced death threats at the age of 15.
I think it's terrible, and it shows the mentality of people. I think that we've got into a place in society where people think it's acceptable, and I think that what I will say is my understanding and my perception, really, as an observer, is that what goes on football pitches is broadly representative of society as a whole, and people bring those societal attitudes onto football pitches, and referees have to deal with them. The difference is that in society, the police manage situations, and referees don't have as many powers as police, but it's the same issues. And I think that we've seen it, and probably the biggest thing around the world has been the rise of sort of popularization and populism in world politics. You see people like Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, and Vladimir Putin, and Bolsonaro in Brazil, all talking absolute nonsense, lying to the public. It's totally become commonplace. Everybody accepts that politicians are openly lying in media broadcasts, in parliament, in everything. And it's become so normal. And people have been able to express views, really, racist, sexist, homophobic views, and that's again become commonplace. So discrimination's been on the rise, and the statistics that bear that fact out as well. So much has happened, and things have got worse. And that's why I think you see these things, because people feel like they can say anything without any sort of comeuppance for that, or any recourse, I should say. And that's where we've got to, and that's why that's happening, in my opinion. But I don't think I'm far wrong. So I think it's really, really interesting to hear these things. Really, really shocking. But almost we've become desensitized to this, because everybody seems to think that they can say the first thing that comes into their head, whether it's positive or negative. And that's where that's left us. It's left us with children receiving death threats. And what kind of society can be happy with that?
You've hit the nail on the head with that. I mean, it is. I was playing in a game, hence why it kind of came to me. Again, the grassroots level, and one of the parents was again shouting at the referee making these decisions, and the referees. I feel sorry for them, because obviously they've got to be professional. I've never experienced a referee being out of touch or out of profession. But would this lead to, if I'm 16, 17, 15, and I've experienced death threats from an adult to, I couldn't care what sort of adult they are. If they're an adult someone who is so idolized as a child as this is how you want to be in a model society, would that lead to referees currently and in the future dying out of a breed where no one would want to become a referee due to this lower league instances?
Well, it's child abuse, isn't it? You have to call it for what it is. It's child abuse. If an adult is abusing a referee who's a child, it's child abuse. And I think that needs to be spoken about more, calling it for what it is, which is the right thing to do. I think that when we look at, the numbers are actually rising and things are going better, and we have a more kind of more interest in becoming a referee than probably at any time. But we need to look a little bit further at how we protect referees, and perhaps the referees that are victims where the teams are being deducted points for repeat offenders and things. That's been in from this season, and it'll be interesting to maybe look at it in, I don't know whether the data is going to be released now at the end of the season, or whether there'll be some more data during next season or at the end of next season. But it'll be interesting to see the impact that's had. But the one thing that we can say for certain is that referee abuse is on the rise and still is. There's been success with the body camera trials in those areas as well. They've recorded 0 reports of abuse when cameras are on referees. Does it need to be that we have to go down that road at the grassroots level? I don't know. But what I will say is there are certain things happening which are kind of doing important things. And I think, dare I suggest that players are not maybe bright enough, some of the players that play on a Sunday morning, to know whether that camera's on all the time or not. And that might be what's in their mind. So do we, when they're hungover, they might not be thinking that way anyway. But, certainly it's had a very, very successful thing in the trial patches. And it might be that that's the way that we need to go to protect children, by making sure that they've all got cameras on, so that we can continue the success of that. But I think if you bring it out to a broader level, sorry, Jamie, I was just going to say, I think if you bring it out to a more broader level and you expand the trial, you probably are likely to see people who are that bad they don't care that there's a camera on. They'll still do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the report that I told you earlier, a referee was headbutted. I mean, so someone's obviously on the pitch, will come onto the pitch when they're not meant to. I mean, and headbutted a referee physically now. But you mentioned that everything's gone up, right? And it's kind of, you mentioned political backgrounds as well. And it's the same with politics, where people say that's incorrect, this isn't right. But what would you do if you were the top dog of the association, of the FA? How would you stop things like a referee getting headbutted? How would you make that eradicated from the game?
I think I'm more in favour of bans for life, which I think some of them have been used a little bit more sparingly, trying to look at different ways. I'm a big believer in bans for life. I'm a big believer in heavier fines and going down the route of saying that that team and the players who are signed on to that team don't get to play for anybody else if they if they don't pay the fine, and heavier fines. You've got to look at various different ways of doing it. But for me, I tend to want to take a more sort of totalitarian, I suppose, type of attitude to it, because it's that serious that I feel there's no other way other than putting things in place that seem quite radical, but in reality the stakes are so high in terms of protecting not even just children but all referees who go out on a Sunday morning, Saturday morning, whatever it is, because they love the game. So for me, you have to look at it that way, and you need to take a hard line, because like I say, you talk about headbutting, you're talking about people being assaulted and all sorts. The stakes are so high that we have to meet that with force, for want of a better term, because we need to show we're serious about cutting this out. So
you, on a personal level, have said on here that you've refereed all over the world. What sort of level are we talking? I mean, to do your job in different countries must be some sort of achievement for yourself personally, right?
No. I think what I was meaning by that was I have coached referees all over the world, so I've had an insight and a window into the world of refereeing in all parts of the world. But what I have to tell you is, I think it's a learning journey for me more than anything, to see how different people are doing different things in different parts of the world. And there's obviously a lot of fundamentals that run through. There's a lot of fundamentals that run through officials of different sports, whether they be rugby referees, cricket cricket umpires, boxing referees, lacrosse officials. I've worked with people in different countries, different sports, and there's a lot of fundamentals of officiating that are very similar. But there are also differences, and you look at them and you think that's a really good idea, and it improves me and enhances me as well. So I've learned an awful lot, and I think that I've worked with a lot of officials at very different levels. I've worked with the newly qualified officials who are trying to get to grips with, managing parents, spectators, the players, that club officials, like we've spoken about a lot on this podcast. But I've also worked with those at the very elite level, FIFA international match officials, who are trying to, their goals are trying to get games in the group stages of the Europa League or the Champions League, or get selected for the Euros or other major tournaments. So you're looking at the priorities of those people and the goals that they set and how they prepare and all of those different things. And it's been really, really interesting for me to coach all those different types of referees, men and women, young and old, and different levels, semi-professional, grassroots, professional, elite level. There's so much that goes into that. And it's been a hugely interesting and rewarding experience that I've enjoyed an awful lot.
You mentioned that referees have the aspiration to go ahead and manage in Europa Leagues and Premier Leagues. Am I right in saying, this is me, I've never ever had an insight into this specific question, so I'm just going to say it how I think it would be. Let's say you have an option, right? And referees could have an option of refereeing Leicester City versus Norwich, or they can referee Manchester United versus Queen's Park Rangers. Do referees have the choice as to what? Can they pick and choose what games they would like, or are they just said, right, you can go to this game and we'll put you up in a hotel for the night and then you're going to go ref the next morning?
No, the way that it's worked generally through this season is it's been different. There's been a different approach, and I think it's come in with Howard Webb being in charge. It's a bit like a football team. So the referees, there's 22 Premier League or 23 Premier League referees. And the referees that are doing well, if you keep going, you keep your place in the team. So there'll be a game for you next week if you're doing well. But then when you make a mistake, there's somebody there ready to take your place, coming off the bench, who's been fourth official or refereeing in the Championship, and who's been doing well, away from it, comes in and taking your place. And I think this has been a pretty interesting approach, and it's worked pretty well, I think, because it's kept a lot of referees on their toes. And there's been a lot of referees that have come up from the Championship who've been in the team as well, who are not technically Premier League referees, who've been keeping Premier League referees out of the team, so to speak. So Premier League referees have not been getting games because Championship referees have been outperforming them and have been keep going. And I think it's the best way to do it. And I think it's the way that supporters want it to be done. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Supporters want the referees who are in form, performing well, to be going. And also it brings that level of accountability in terms of, people want, if somebody's refereeing your team and they make a mistake, you want them to not be able to referee the week after. And this policy means that that's the case. So you're looking at all of those different aspects, and that level of accountability has gone up. Referees can't choose what games they do. They can ask not to referee maybe certain teams for a period if they've had a particularly difficult experience, or a manager is gunning for them in the media. We saw that this season. Jurgen Klopp went for Paul Tierney in a big way on a number of occasions, and that probably was quite difficult for Paul. But I think you can talk about various different bits and pieces that go on, but by and large, it's done on form and who's doing well. And we talked about the marks before. Who's getting the good marks? Because the big game every week, or most weeks, I would say, is the 4:30 Sunday game, and that's the one that all the referees want. You're doing well if you're getting appointed to that game, because that's normally the plum tie of the weekend. Is that game, and you'll see that more often than not, Manchester Derby would be played at 4:30 on a Sunday. Liverpool, Man United, we played 4:30 on a Sunday. Aston Villa, whoever they're playing, they've been in the top 4 this season. That's been quite often. Tottenham have been right up there, going for the Champions League. Newcastle in previous seasons, last couple of seasons, they've been in that grounds. So St James's Park talking for those games, because those teams are doing well, and when they're playing at home, they're difficult to beat. They don't lose a lot of games at home, those teams. So that's why you're looking for those appointments. When the appointments drop in the email inbox at 4 p.m. on a Monday afternoon.
You cut out there, so just tell us about the email bit. So referees will get an email like Monday to say that they're in line for the job.
So if you're a Premier League referee, Jamie, you'll get an email on a Monday, and it'll tell you where you're gonna be. And if you think you've done well, you might be expecting to see your name on another game. If you think you haven't made a mistake, you're thinking, I hope I get an email. If you think you've done all right, but you might have been able to do better, then you're thinking, right, I'm either going to be 4th official in the Premier League, or I might get a championship middle. And you're always looking to see that and assess where you're going to be and how that's going to work. So, and also for the majority, I think, you get Anthony Taylor and Michael Oliver and maybe one or two others that have got set teams where they work with the same assistants all the time. But also for the majority, they're going to be looking to see who's on their line as well, and that's a big part. And who's VAR for them as well, So there's a lot of bits that you're looking into to try and learn and understand, and that normally comes in at 4 p.m. On a Monday, unless there's a Monday night game, and then it'll be on a Tuesday. Basically, it's always the day after the last game of the game week previous.
I'm probably right in saying that referees can't referee their own team, right?
Yeah, can't referee their own team. So Michael Oliver is a Newcastle fan. He can't referee Newcastle or Sunderland. Trying to think of another one where it's quite public which team they support. I think, is there one that's quite obvious? I think.
Was it one Mike Dean and Tranmere?
Yeah, Mike Dean and Tranmere would be one, yeah. And I think it's sometimes really helpful for referees when the team that they support is not at the level that they're officiating. That can be really useful for them.
But could you just say, in hindsight, could you just say that you were a Southend fan, but in reality you were a Liverpool fan?
There's background checks take place, so they will ring up the clubs that are close to where you live and have grown up. And they will say, so if it's you, for example, they'll ring up and they'll say, I'm not exactly sure where you live, but if they would ring up the clubs near you and they would say, has Jamie.Mccreedy ever had a season ticket at your club? And if the answer is yes, then they can confirm that what you've said is true, or they'll ask, why didn't you tell us you had a season ticket there? And that'll kind of be the basis for where you are. So you'll not be able to referee that team or their rivals. So I've seen you got a Watford shirt behind you. If you're a Watford fan,
and the Liverpool one here as well.
Yeah, you'll not be able to referee Watford or Luton.
Okay. So that's not great if I wanted to be a referee, because I go to Tottenham, Watford, Stevenage, all of these teams. So I wouldn't be able to referee any sort of games, I suppose.
Watford. Referee Carlisle, won't you?
I have got Watford and Liverpool, Harvey Elliott and Chicho Hernandez signed shirts behind me. So just tell us then, as a referee, I saw the referees in the World Cup. They got given watches. They got given, obviously, to go to the World Cup. They got taken there, etc. For referees, and obviously it wouldn't be grassroots, let's say League One, League Two, and obviously Premier League, we know what the standard would be. For League One and League Two, are they taken to games in VIP cars? Are they taken with teams? How are they exported and imported, shall I say, around the country?
So the way it would normally work would be that they would drive to a hotel in the vicinity of, in the reasonable vicinity, I would say it would be somewhere between 10 and 15 miles away from the ground. And if they need to stay overnight, then they'll stay at that hotel overnight. But if it's something that's drivable within the morning, for example, of the game, no more than maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours at a push. You would meet in the car park, and then the people carrier would come, take the team of officials from the hotel car park, take them to the ground, and then deliver them there, and then deliver them back after the game. And that's to keep them all together. If anything happens, they can all talk to each other, and it keeps it all, if anything needs to be reported and things like that can be done. And then obviously they can then make their way home from that hotel, which is a much more neutral zone, as I say, normally 10 to 15 miles away from the ground that they've been refereeing at.
So you said earlier, and I kind of put the piece of the puzzle together, if Mike Dean, first one that comes to my head, got essentially relegated from the referee's match day squad, and he doesn't get picked for these games, do they get demoted to the championship? Is that how it works?
So that would be again like the teams that are playing in the leagues. That would only happen over the course of a season. You wouldn't be looking to be getting demoted after a couple of bad games in August. Do you know what I mean? You'd be really looking at their performances over a sustained period before you would demote a referee. But in terms of the squad situation, which I described, yes, they might not referee for a period of weeks, because others are outperforming them at that given time, and also because maybe they've made one or two mistakes that they need to reflect on, and so what their likelihood is that there would be fourth official somewhere, and I think that generally referees accept that. I was talking to a championship referee who made a mistake towards the end of last season. I think maybe it was 4 or 5 rounds before the end of the last season in the championship, made a mistake, and his exact words to me was, "I know I'll be holding up the boards for the rest of the season." Now, he actually got a game on the last day of the season, so it maybe wasn't quite as bad as what he feared. But there's an acceptance of how, if you're in this game, there's an acceptance of how it works, because that when you're flying high, like he had been earlier in the season before he made a mistake, he's getting a game every week, and so you're not complaining when that happens. So equally, you can't really complain when you make a mistake and you're out, because you know that there's going to be a chance somebody else will make a mistake and you'll be back in, and you've got to make the most of that chance when it comes along.
So then, we've got a few more topics to just go over before the end of the show. For yourself personally, what would be the advice that you'd give to aspiring referees?
Try and get yourself around as many officials as possible, diverse groups of officials in terms of ones at different levels, officiating in different competitions with varying levels of experience. Listen to what they're saying. If you can work with them on games, it's even better. And just take the advice that you can get. Being around other referees and seeing how they approach situations and deal with them can only enhance your own kind of, the way you approach, because you take the bits that you like from everybody you meet, and it's no different in the refereeing game. So I would say try and get yourself around the right people who've got a lot of experience and have refereed in competitions you're wanting to be refereeing in, and you'll not go that far wrong, I wouldn't think.
So for yourself personally, obviously you are a referee. I often ask players a very similar question, and I'm going to ask you the same thing. And I know that the lifespan for a referee is probably a lot longer than what it could be for a player. I'm not entirely sure why, maybe because players are constantly using their bodies for fitness. I don't know. But for yourself, what would be the highest league the highest league that you'd be able to referee in a realistic basis due to the lifespan of a ref?
I think that, I'm 26 at the minute. So at the moment, although it's very unlikely because I'm actually getting on for the way the game's going, but I think that, it would actually be, of course, the Premier League and the top level would be the ambition, but sometimes you have to be realistic about what part you have to play, where you actually sit in the grand scheme of things. And that's why I think it's always better, and I don't know whether anybody said this from a playing perspective, but I think it's better not to put a a kind of a level on it to
Okay.
think just I want to try and go as far as my ability will take me.
Mhm.
And I think it's probably the same for players. But I think you know if you can do a job for people who are pointing you to games and you can deliver games and you can be a safe pair of hands and things like that, then that at that level, then that's the best thing that you can do, and that's you've got to enjoy those games because that's where you are and you can be trusted in those moments.
But I'm presuming for referees, if you were doing well at the level that you're currently at now, you eventually get pushed up and pushed up and pushed up, and before you know it, you could be doing National League games, right?
Yeah, and I think there's that element of you always want to try and go as far as you can go. The ambition is always going to burn. You're always going to look and you're always going to say, I've done well here and I'm going to have to go to the next level and let's see how I can go and things like that. So, yeah, and I think that when that flame goes out for you, then that's when you need to assess your options and understand what's going on because the drive should never go to want to improve.
But referees who are refereeing in the Premier League, they all started in as the 15, 16-year-old referee, probably getting abused in the park, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's a very, very interesting fact that I think of the 22 or 23, I can't remember exactly which number it is at the moment, referees that are on the group of Premier League officials at the moment, only 2 are from south of the Midlands. Now, there was a stat that came out the other day that said I think it's 4 or 5 teams from the north of England in the Premier League for next season, which is the lowest number ever. And it's the complete opposite for referees. There's virtually none from the south. The Midlands upwards is 95% of the group of officials. So it's interesting, I would say, to assess what are the conditions that take place in the Midlands and in particular Yorkshire and the North East, because that's where there's traditionally been hotbeds of referees. I think if you think about England's number 1 referee in this millennium, you would look at the majority of the top officials. So Howard Webb being from Rotherham, South Yorkshire, refereed the World Cup final. Mark Clattenburg from County Durham, North East England, refereed the Champions League final, European Championships final, and FA Cup final in the same year. Anthony Taylor refereed a major European club competition final last summer from Manchester. And so, I think it's interesting sometimes to observe why that is and what is the product at the grassroots level that sets northern referees on a trajectory that's clearly greater than southern referees.
Obviously, to be able to referee in European competitions, the idea would probably be to speak more than one language, right?
Yes, but it's important to be aware that in terms of all on-field communications must be in English. That's a FIFA rule that they put in place. Mm-hmm. So it's advantageous, I suppose, in terms of getting on with delegates and speaking to people when you're there. But whether you are Italian, Spanish, English, French, German, you've got to speak English on the field of play. Those are the rules.
So before I spoke to you today, obviously spoke about what you would like to speak about, and obviously you said about neurodiversity and how much that meant to you. And obviously I did some research into what that meant in a sporting term. I've spoke to some people before who have wanted to highlight that particular movement in football specifically. I'm presuming you'd want to talk about. So go on then, tell us about what that means to you.
So I am autistic myself, and that can create a lot of challenges. Things like communication, coordination, organisation, things like that. Things that are really important actually for refereeing. And I really always try and highlight it. I'm a trustee of a charity. I'm vice chair of the board of trustees at a charity called Daisy Chain, which works with neurodivergent individuals with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, ADD, many different forms of neurodiversity, and it's something I'm really passionate about. Something I really try to talk about because I feel I'm in a privileged position. I often have fantastic opportunities like this one you've given me today, Jamie, to talk to really good people like yourself who are really on board with sharing these messages. And I just really think it's important to talk about it and the impact that it can have. And I think that we're talking a lot. If we're talking about referees at the moment, we're talking about Premier League this season, the first female referee during this season, first black referee for well over a decade this season, first South Asian referee in the history of the Premier League this season. And so when you talk about diversity from that perspective, we need to talk about kind of really important things like invisible disabilities, like neurodiversity, and how it's important, I think, to try and get people like that in the game, particularly at the top level. I think there was a really good interview given by Greg Halford, who's autistic as well. He's played in the Premier League, and I think that if there are other autistic Premier League players, managers, club officials, whoever involvement, I think it's really important to try and get them to be talking about those things as well, to show that it's not like if you are neurodivergent, you don't need to, for example, be involved in a different sport or be involved in a disability sport, because you can be involved in mainstream sport. Greg Alford's played in the Premier League and he's autistic, so it can be done. And we need to talk about that, and we need to talk about what we need to do to make adjustments and accommodations for neurodivergent individuals to get through that level and through those levels and to get to the top level, because there might be a slightly different path for them. So we need to talk about those things as well. But I just really think it's important to highlight it and to bring it to light, because hidden disabilities are very much hidden. So we need to talk about it, just because people say things, silly things really, like you don't look autistic or whatever. We need to be talking about well, yeah, okay, you might not be able to say it, but it has a massive impact on people's lives, and it doesn't mean they can't achieve the things, but we need to try and get them in the right positions to thrive and look at how we can do that. So I think it's a really important message that I really want to talk about.
Absolutely, and of course, I really appreciate that message that you've just said. I'm not autistic. I don't have ADHD. I've never been tested for it, but I don't think I do. I'd like to say quite confidently. So again, it's coming from someone who hasn't experienced what you experience or what other people experience with ADHD, dyslexia. One of my family members is dyslexic, for example. So I understand that there is, for her, for example, there's different ways to get around things. And I think that is quite a cool thing to have sometimes, to be honest, where you don't get to that spot like me, but you get there a completely different way. And I really, really like that. But for you as a referee in a footballing term or in a general term, the reason why you're so passionate for neurodiversity in sport is because you want to highlight the fact that everyone's different, that everyone takes longer to process things. Is that what the message behind it would be?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, like you've just said, really, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and the way that, a lot of autistic people or people with various different forms of neurodiversity, the way they experience the world is different, but the way that they see solutions to issues is different as well. And what you can actually tend to find is that neurodivergent people cut out a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of thought process and things, and generally tend to go from problem to solution a lot quicker than neurotypical people, which can be a really useful tool, I think.
Nathan, what an absolute privilege it's been today to have to have you onto the show. As I said to you at the start, it's great to have a referee on. It's been a long time coming, I'd say. I mean, I really only talk to players, coaches and fans, and it's so good. Obviously, I try to get as many different routes and different people into the game as possible. Yeah. The first referee on the show, Nathan, it's been a great pleasure. You've answered all of my questions that have come your way in such experience and depth. So I really thank you for coming on, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Jimmy.